At this point, may I now invite Mr. Kamran Khan. Mr. Kamran Khan is the Managing Director and Head of ESG at Deutsche Bank APAC. And to felicitate Mr. Khan, may I invite Rob Garrett and 𝗗𝗶𝗹𝗂𝗀𝗂𝗃, please.
So Kamran's been making sustainability a core pillar of his corporate strategy and for championing ESG-conscious development. Kamran is a firm believer in his belief that Asia-Pacific companies can use ESG to establish themselves as global citizens.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This is my first encounter with this community, so thank you very much for welcoming me. I'm going to touch on 3 points, hopefully briefly. First, the personal journey for how did I get here? Second, what is the role of Asia in this whole global ESG movement? And third, I can't help but discuss ESG standards, which seem to come up in every dialogue. So my background is I've been doing sustainability longer than the term has been coined. So I was with the World Bank, with U.S. Agency for International Development. I used to have an impact fund, an MAS licensed impact fund, and then immediately prior to that, I was with the Obama administration in charge of global investments for U.S. Millennium Challenge Corporation. So you can imagine that I've been knee-deep in sustainability for a very long time. And it's a pleasure to see how it has expanded. Because you go through life, I did investment banking with all the big names, Goldman, JP Morgan, whatnot. And then I went back into development. And I did all kinds of things all through my life that made sense to me, that had a purpose, that kind of got me out of bed. But I never figured out that they would be a job that will allow all the different things I've done in life to connect in one. And thank you for the ESG movement. Finally, I have a job that connects diplomacy, finance, international development, and all the other things into one. And I came to Deutsche Bank, or an investment bank, to get scale. So when you work at the World Bank or any of these DFIs, you can do very high quality work, and I'm very proud of that work, but you don't get scale. It takes you a year or two to get one deal done, and then you say, now what? This needs to be replicated 200, 2,000 times to really have an impact in the world. So I came here. Now it's absolutely the right setup. Instead of doing $1 billion worth of sustainability investment in a year, I'm now overseeing that in a week. And so it's a really, really positive feeling. Second, Asia's role. So we set up an ESG Center of Excellence for Deutsche Bank here in Singapore. It's a partnership with MAS. We didn't set it up in Frankfurt or New York or London. We set it up here for a purpose. And the purpose is the following. Asia is the hardest place to do ESG in a credible way. And to do that, you need to have firepower here in the region. You can't have people flying in, and you can't have this idea of just copying and pasting rules and standards and implementation models from Europe and North America and pasting them here. It never works. It doesn't work in any industry. So the trick is, how do you keep the standards high? Now, we as a bank have our own ESG taxonomy. It's very closely tied to the EU taxonomy, and it's a global standard. But the idea is to keep the standard high, but then have the ability and the depth of understanding in sustainability to apply those standards in a manner that is in line with ground realities in your jurisdiction, particularly in Asia. So this is where the cutting edge of the global ESG industry is. As these deals get defined, they set standards for the entire global industry. And I'm very proud to say that we've been setting these standards from deals done in Asia that are now global standards. And various industries, and I'm happy to talk to you about that later if you have questions. So I want you to, leave this place at least understanding fully well that this notion that ESG movement started in Europe, US is picking up, and Asia is sort of the backwaters where it will come eventually is absolutely not true. There is a reverse loop now going back from Asia into those international standards, and one of the confusion is caused by league tables. When you look at how much sustainable finance was raised around the world, often it looks like Europe, US, then maybe Asia. But the reality is, when you look at companies raising $10 billion bonds in Europe, at the end of the day, 7-8 billion of that is actually coming to Asia. Why? Because this is where the investments of the future is happening. This is where the distribution networks, the manufacturing facilities are being set up. So keep that in mind, that Asia is not the backwaters. We have a big role to play, and it's very, very important that we position ourselves that way. Last bit about standards. I always say that if there were universal ESG standards, I would probably be the first one to say they need to be changed. Why? Because we are all learning, and these standards are evolving. At the end of the day, standards are important, but fundamentally, investors have a responsibility. So think about mergers and acquisition. Is there a standard for mergers and acquisition? No, there isn't, right? I used to do M&A. You figure out as a company what your risk appetite is, what your commercial strategy is, what do you want to do, and then you make the decision, I want to make this call or not, right? Same thing with any other investment. If you are going to invest in a new company, you're not going to invest it just based on the credit rating of that company. So if you call yourself an ESG investor, how can you make this investment, call it ESG, without having actual data? How can you do this by just relying upon a third party's ESG rating? This is a big problem in the ESG industry now, particularly on the buy side with the asset managers. I think it's changing very quickly. And I think once it changes, then there will be some standards that you could look at to say, okay, how do I compare my decisions? But fundamentally, the responsibility should lie with the investor. If you're raising money from investors, from LPs, and saying, I'm an ESG expert, and I'm going to invest your money in ESG assets, you better have the know-how and the skill set in-house to make those decisions, rather than relying upon third parties and then turning around and say, oh, there was greenwashing, but it's not my responsibility. So anyway, I hope this gives you a little bit of a sense, and I'm very happy to be here. Once again, thank you for the invitation, and great to meet all of you.